Every morning, the young Christian pastor followed the same routine. In his early 30s, he was known as a dedicated man who rarely missed a church service. Before sunrise, he would wake up, prepare a simple breakfast, and spend some quiet time reading religious books before heading to church. The people around him respected him for his discipline and sincere character. Most of his days were filled with church activities. He led prayers, prepared sermons, visited church members, and listened to the personal struggles of families who came seeking guidance. Many people admired his ability to speak calmly and confidently about faith. To them, he seemed like a man who had already found all the answers he needed. On weekends, the church became even busier. Weddings, community gatherings, charity events, and youth meetings kept him occupied from morning until evening. He enjoyed helping others and believed that serving people was one of the most important parts of his calling. Despite his busy schedule, he loved spending time reading. Books had always been one of his favorite companions. His small apartment was filled with shelves containing religious texts, historical studies, biographies, and philosophical works. Whenever he had free time, he preferred reading over almost any other activity. Many evenings ended with him sitting alone near a window, reading under a small lamp. Sometimes he would become so absorbed in a book that he lost track of time. Learning about different cultures and beliefs fascinated him, even though he rarely discussed those interests openly with others. As the years passed, he became increasingly curious about the history of religion. While preparing sermons, he often encountered references to ancient prophets and civilizations. Those references occasionally sparked questions in his mind, but he usually pushed them aside and focused on his duties. The people around him assumed his faith was completely unshakable. After all, he had spent years studying theology and serving the church. Few could imagine that he sometimes wrestled with difficult questions when nobody else was around. Whenever those questions appeared, he would search through books, articles, and historical records. He was not trying to challenge his faith. He simply wanted a deeper understanding of the beliefs he had dedicated his life to teaching. One afternoon, after finishing several church responsibilities earlier than expected, he found himself with a few free hours. The weather was calm, and he decided to spend the afternoon at a public library he occasionally visited. It was a quiet place where he could focus without interruptions. As he walked through the library doors that day, he had no idea that an ordinary visit would eventually change the course of his life. At that moment, he was simply looking for another book to satisfy his curiosity, unaware that a discovery waiting somewhere among the shelves would lead him down a path he had never expected. The library was unusually quiet that afternoon. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows between the rows of bookshelves. The pastor wandered slowly through the aisles, running his fingers across book spines as he searched for something interesting to read. He had no particular title in mind. He was simply following his curiosity. After spending several minutes in the history section, he moved toward a shelf containing books about world religions. It was an area he had visited before, usually to understand how different faiths developed throughout history. As he scanned the shelves, one book caught his attention. It was a translated copy of the Quran. He paused for a moment. He had heard many things about Islam throughout his life, but he realized he had never actually sat down and read the Quran for himself. Most of what he knew came from conversations, articles, or the opinions of other people. Standing there, he felt a strange urge to open the book and see what it actually contained. He carried the Quran to a nearby table and began reading. At first, he expected to spend only a few minutes with it before moving on to something else. But as he turned the pages, he found himself reading far longer than planned. The language was different from what he expected. Instead of confusion, he felt a surprising sense of clarity in many passages. Several verses spoke about the creation of the heavens and the earth, about human responsibility, and about the importance of sincerity before God. What surprised him most was how often familiar prophets appeared in the text. Names he had known since childhood were mentioned again and again, but from a perspective he had never explored before. An hour passed without him noticing. The library had grown quieter, and a few visitors had already left. Yet he remained seated, turning page after page. Occasionally he stopped to think about a verse, reading it again before continuing. Some passages raised questions in his mind. Others seemed to answer questions he had carried for years. As he continued reading, he noticed an elderly Muslim man arranging books nearby. The old man appeared to be one of the library's caretakers. His gray beard and gentle expression gave him an air of calm wisdom. Every now and then, he would quietly organize books and help visitors find what they needed. The pastor eventually approached him with a few questions. He expected a brief conversation, perhaps only a few minutes. Instead, the old man listened carefully and answered with patience. There was no pressure, no argument, and no attempt to win a debate. The elderly librarian simply explained what the verses meant and encouraged him to read more for himself. That simple attitude left a strong impression on him. Throughout his years of religious study, he had encountered many passionate debaters. But this elderly man was different. He seemed completely comfortable admitting when a question required deeper study. His calm confidence came not from trying to prove himself right, but from a genuine belief in what he understood. As the library prepared to close for the evening, the pastor checked the time and was shocked to see how many hours had passed. He borrowed the translated Quran and walked home carrying it under his arm. The old librarian smiled as he left and told him he was welcome to return anytime. During the walk home, the pastor could not stop thinking about what he had read. For the first time in many years, he felt as though a new door had quietly opened in front of him, and he could not resist wondering what might be waiting on the other side. Over the following weeks, the pastor found himself returning to the library again and again. At first, he told himself that he was only doing research. He wanted to understand the Quran from its original teachings rather than from second-hand opinions. Yet each visit seemed to draw him deeper into a journey he had never planned to take. The translated Quran became part of his daily routine. He would read a few pages in the morning before church duties and continue reading late into the night after everyone else had gone home. The more he read, the more questions surfaced. But strangely, many of those questions were followed by answers in later chapters. His conversations with the elderly Muslim librarian also became more frequent. They often sat together in a quiet corner of the library, discussing faith, prophets, prayer, and the relationship between humanity and God. The old man never pressured him to accept Islam. Instead, he encouraged him to think carefully, read sincerely, and seek the truth wherever it led. One afternoon, the pastor asked a question that had been troubling him for a long time. He spoke about doubts he had quietly carried for years but had never shared with anyone. The elderly man listened attentively and then answered with remarkable simplicity. His response was not complicated or philosophical. It was clear, direct, and rooted in the teachings of the Quran. The pastor left that day feeling a sense of peace he had not experienced in a very long time. Months passed, and the internal struggle grew stronger. On one side stood the life he had always known, the church community he served, and the identity he had carried for years. On the other side was a growing conviction that the message he was discovering in the Quran was true. The decision before him was not easy. He knew it could change everything. Many nights were spent awake in reflection. He prayed sincerely, asking God to guide him to the truth. He did not want to follow emotions or make a rushed decision. He wanted certainty. The more he searched, the more convinced he became that Islam offered the answers he had been seeking for much of his adult life. One quiet evening, after another long discussion with the elderly librarian, he sat alone and reflected on the journey that had begun with a single book on a library shelf. He thought about the countless hours of reading, the questions, the doubts, and the unexpected clarity he had found along the way. For the first time, his heart felt settled. Not long afterward, he made his decision. With sincerity and full understanding of what it meant, the pastor embraced Islam. It was not a decision driven by pressure, emotion, or personal gain. It came after months of study, reflection, and a genuine search for truth. The elderly librarian, who had patiently answered his questions from the beginning, was among the first to witness that life-changing moment. The journey ahead was not without challenges, but he faced them with confidence. He had discovered a new sense of purpose and a deeper connection to God. Looking back, he often reflected on how a simple visit to a library had completely altered the course of his life. What began as curiosity had become conviction, and what began as a search for knowledge had become a journey of faith. Some names, photographs, and visual representations used in this story may not reflect actual individuals. Certain details have been adapted or recreated to respect privacy while preserving the essence and lessons of the story. Likewise, some images or video footage associated with this story may be illustrative rather than authentic recordings of the people involved. This approach helps protect personal privacy while allowing the story to be shared with a wider audience. If you enjoyed this inspiring story, be sure to follow the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and explore our other videos for more remarkable journeys of faith, discovery, and personal transformation from around the world.